signing in.
There we
Got
go.
it.
There we go.
We're
Thank you,
recording.
Joe.
So, all right. So let's go to verse 9 of chapter 7. Then we're going to go back to the beginning. Okay. And can you read verse 9 and 10 for me, Matt?
Get back over to it.
Yep, it says, as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened.
Okay. Real quick, can you turn to Revelations 20, verse 4? And read that.
Says, then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. Also, I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years.
All right, in Revelations 4, 2-3, it says, immediately I was in spirit, and behold, there was a throne set in heaven, and upset the throne, there was one sitting. John's spirit was, okay, anyway, so in Revelations 4, they talks about a throne. And then we got the 20 elders that are circled, the thrones as well. So when you're looking at these thrones set up, it's probably a parallel between the book of Revelations. And it happens at the same time. One of the things that you see in this verse, it says that if you read the last phrase in verse 9, read that again. Matt, the last phrase in verse 9.
His throne was fiery flames, its wheels were burning fire. Is that,
Yes.
That's the end of verse 9.
Yeah, so this thrones that we're talking about here is a mobile throne. I want everybody to write that down in your mind. This is a mobile throne. This is not fixed in the heavenly realms. This is like the book of Ezekiel chapter 1 and 2. This is a mobile throne. This is like the children of Israel putting the Ark of the Covenant and carrying it on poles in the center of the camp. This is mobile throne. You guys got that? This is not a heavenly realm issue. Okay. And we can also go read again the last verse of verse 10, Matt.
A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000.
Yeah, the court sat in judgment, and the books were open. That part is very, very important. The books were open. Okay. So in the Talmud tractate Rosh Hashanah. Okay. And so for those who are not familiar with the Talmud is a word that comes from the word Talmudim or disciple. And the Talmud is a collection of 2 or 3 rabbis' opinions on scripture. And when they take them, what they do is they take the different opinions, they put them in a section and allow you as a reader to read the different opinions and make your own decisions. The Talmud, for the most part, is just taking commentary, and instead of just citing going on with one guy's commentary versus another, they put them all together and allow you, the reader, to study it and see the different points of view. Do you guys got that?
Yeah.
Now, I know in Christianity, they curse the Talmud big time because there's a couple phrases where, Yeshua is insulted a few times. And as a whole, I would say the Talmud is very interesting and gives a lot of context and it gives you insight. But don't use it as gospel, but use it as insight for understanding how things are coming together. Does that make sense? Okay. So in the Talmud tractate Rosh Hashanah, it states that on Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets, there are 3 books that are opened up at this time. The first one is called the Fate of the Wicked. Okay. Otherwise basically known as the book of judgment. Okay. The second one is the book of the righteous. Okay. And the third one is those of the intermediate class are recorded. All right. So I don't want to get into a lot of that stuff. We don't need to get bogged down in this, but I want to get into the timing of this. So we know that Yeshua, when he returns, is going to come back in the clouds, right? And the whole earth is going to see him. Okay. When you think of how he's going to appear, think of Ezekiel chapter 1. He's coming on a mobile throne. When you put this in context with the book of Daniel, he's going to come up and these thrones are going to be set up. It's giving us a certain time zone. Sometime around the Feast of Trumpets, he's going to come in and be crowned king, right? And the reason why you look at how this is divided up in the book of Daniel, we deal with his dream. And then in the middle, we deal with the crowning of a Messiah. And then we deal with the destruction of a final empire, right? So why would Daniel frame it that way? Because he's telling you kind of how things are going to come in within the God's appointed times. God is going to appoint, he's going to open these books up sometime around the Feast of Trumpets, and he's going to crown Yeshua. Ancient of Days will crown the Messiah at that point. Books will be open, and basically at that point, 10 days later, we go through the 10 days of awe. So when you read this is super interesting because he's talking about the final 10 days before the great day of the Lord. Okay.
Hey,
Can everybody
Rob.
see that?
Oh, just a question. So yeah, I remember that mobile throne, and I'm just thinking about when he returns, because when he returns and there's a temple established, you know, he talks about how he calls the temple his throne, the temple in the millennial reign. So I guess when it's set up again in the millennial kingdom and Yeshua is reigning, the Father will sit in the temple as his throne, as a permanent throne, I guess, or a fixed throne.
Yeah. So remember, okay, let's step back. Remember, in Shiloh, we have that's where the Ark of the Covenant, and that's where the location was. Philistines came, burned it, took it away, brought back, and there was an intermediate period, right? David, then he tries to attempt to bring the Ark of the Covenant up to Jerusalem. When he brings it up, there's one of his guys gets killed for touching the Ark. It sits there for a time and a season, and then eventually it's taken up into the city of David, the mobile throne, because remember the Ark is a mobile throne.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
And then it sits under a tabernacle in the city of David until Solomon builds a temple, and then there's a permanent throne set up. Okay. So when we're looking at chapter 7, we see this mobile throne until that starts at the Feast of Trumpets, marching 10 days to walk into the permanent throne, which will be in the temple in Jerusalem.
Interesting.
Okay. So are you guys, can you all make those connections? You see how all that comes together?
Yeah.
Now, for a person who doesn't study God's appointed times, it doesn't have the same meaning. They don't understand that 40 days prior to that day of judgment, all within Orthodox Judaism, they're fasting and praying. They're on their knees, they're praying because they're preparing in every season before the coming day of the Lord. It's not a secret in Judaism that the day of the Lord is the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. It's not a secret to them. To us, it's a secret because we don't, as a whole, we don't keep the feast. But to them, it's not. Okay. All right. Let's go back to the very beginning. To verse 2. Paul, will you read verse 2 to us, for verse 2 of chapter 7?
Verse 2. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision at night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were churning up the great sea.
Okay. Anybody ever, and then we're followed by four winds, four beasts, right? I want you to briefly go to Zechariah chapter 6.
Zechariah.
You guys got it there? Okay, so verse 1. Joe, can you read verse 1? 1 and 2. Would you read 1 and 2?
Yes. What was it, Zechariah what?
Chapter 6, verse 1 and 2.
Chapter 6. Okay. Again, I lifted my eyes, and behold, I saw four chariots emerging from between the two mountains, mountains of bronze. The first chariot had red horses, the second chariot black horses, the third chariot white horses, and the fourth chariot had strong dappled horses.
All right, so you notice you got four winds, and we got four horses released, right? In the book of Revelations, it doesn't talk about chariots, it talks about four horses, but the colors are very similar. And if you get in the translational issues, you might get confused over colors, but they're basically the same colors he's referring to in Zechariah. And also, now these are events that happened before the great day of the Lord, but you see this four winds, the releasing of something. Why? My question to you guys is, why four winds? Why four chariots? Why four horses? What does that mean Hebraically?
The whole earth, every corner of the earth covered. Four winds.
That's what I was thinking, all the earth.
Okay. In the book of Enoch, it gives a reference to, I saw the cornerstone of the earth, and I saw the four winds which support the earth and the sky. So there's a reference in the book of Enoch that's very similar to what you just said, Mom. All right, and then it references about 4 or 5 different things. I will say that, it's a releasing, but okay, think of the Hebrew letters: Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. Dalet, what does the Dalet stand for? It's actually a Hebrew word, and it has a specific meaning. Does anybody know what Dalet means?
A door.
A door, exactly. So a door is opened, 4 winds come out. A door is open, 4 chariots come out. A door is open, 4 horses come out. It's the 4 is represent a door, and it begins something. Okay. So when he starts the chapter 7, he begins with this dream, and a door is open, and it's released these winds, and then we're followed by 4 beasts. Okay. Pretty interesting how Daniel does it, but how God does, the pattern is similar in all of the prophets. Whenever this done, is very similar pattern all the way through the book of Revelations. Okay. So we have 4 animals. We talked about that last week. We know the first animal was a lion, right? And it had 2 wings, and the wings were basically ripped off. And we know that represents the Babylonian Empire. Then we have the next beast was a bear, not as menacing as a lion, but pretty powerful as well. And we know that bear represent the Medo-Persian Empire. It has 3 ribs in its mouth, which reference 3 kingdoms it destroys. From what we understand, that was the Babylonian Empire, the Egyptian Empire, and the Lydians. Okay. And then we have a third, and it's represented by a leopard. And most people agree that's the Greeks, right? The Greek Empire, the Macedonian Empire, and it has 4 wings. But what's the difference between this leopard that had 4 wings and the lion that had 2 wings, other than the number? What's the difference between the two?
One of them stood up on 2 feet and was given the heart of a human.
Yeah, that's part of it. But just before he stands on 2 feet, what happens to those wings?
They were plucked out.
Yeah, they're plucked out. So after a time, it lost its power, its mobility, its ability to conquer was basically come to an end. Okay. In the case of the leopard, which represents the Macedonian Greek Empire, we know that after Alexander the Great, within a 10-year period of time, he ruled most of the known world. And if you look at the actual area that he conquered, Greek, Egypt, all the way over to the Indus River, this is massive territory he covered. Actually, pretty much comparable or more so than the Roman Empire. And then we're followed by this great beast, which Daniel struggles with the 4 beasts that we talked about last week, possibly being Leviathan. Okay, and then we end up with back to the beginning of the Ancient of Days. Okay, and that's where we ended last week. Any questions before we get into the interpretation?
I have a question in regards to the answers given about the 4 corners and the 4 pillars of the earth. Well, why does it make that reference about the 4 corners and the 4 pillars?
Yeah, in the book of Job, in Job, I believe it's 38. I'd have to go there right away. We see 38, 4-7. Let's see. And in verse 4, depending on your translation, it starts off in 38:4. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? That's the measuring, or the plumb line. To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. All right, so that's a reference. Those 4 corners of the earth is a reference to how the earth is established. And I read in an article by a really interesting guy, which you guys might want to write his name down. His name is Velikovsky. I've referenced him before, but Velikovsky alludes to the fact that the earth has 4 bulging. It bulges at 4 different locations, and so it's as if we think he's being figuratively, but there is this it's not just symbolic. It actually represents 4 corners, and like a temple, you have a founding stone or the beginning stone. You lay your plumb line, and you have 4 corners, right? The New Jerusalem is going to have 4 corners when it comes down. So you're going to have the earth is going to house the New Jerusalem. So it's going to have these 4 corners. These are symbols, but they're also probably, if the Father showed us, we could see those 4 bulging parts of the earth, the way he built the earth. Okay, that's a great question.
Well, that's one of the arguments for the whole flat earth theory, but we won't go there today.
Yeah, please don't. All right. So before we get into the interpretation, does anybody have any questions other than what Joe just went into? Okay. All right. So Mom, can you read verse 15, 16, 17, and 18?
Okay, and I'm doing the New American Standard, I believe it is.
Okay.
As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. The great beasts, which are the four in number, are four kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. Verse 19.
No, stop right there. So if you said that in Hebrew, what would that be? Leolam vaed, forever and ever. That's a Hebrew. It's in a prayer. What he ended basically the last end of our prayer that we do on Shabbat. That's really interesting how he does that. All right, so what he does there, he does a summary statement and then he gets into the middle of it. So Alexander, can you read verse 19 through 22?
Sure. Then I wanted to know the true meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws. The beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. And as I watched, this horn was waging war against the saints and defeating them until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the saints of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom.
Okay. So this is interesting. Daniel, he's curious about this fourth beast. How many of you guys would feel the same way?
Yeah.
Yeah, this fourth beast is something unique. All right. So when was the rise? Does anybody know kind of the rise of Imperial Rome when it started and when it came to an end?
No.
All right. So it's been figured that it started with Julius Caesar in about 30 BC. Okay, when he conquered Gaul or the Galli in France, and then it ended somewhere around 468, around about 470. It lasted a little over 450 years, and Imperial Rome did, with the finally coming down to the barbarian tribes destroying Rome. That was kind of the end of the end for them. The last 7,500 years, it was falling apart. So how does Rome, the beast of Rome, fit this picture of the end times? And this is the question that everybody's asked. How does Rome come back to power in the future? Anybody? I mean, a lot of these prophets say it survived in the Holy Roman Empire, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How many have heard this or read this before?
No.
No comments. How many have any ideas about how this came about? How did it wind up with the 10 toes at the very end being part of the beast?
Don't know.
You talking about in reality, Rob? Like how's
Yeah.
it coming about from the Roman Empire to now, or?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. For the last 2,000 years, or 1,630 years, how has it become this at the end of the age?
Well, I know that today, there's a lot of talk about a multipolar world order where we're shifting from the unipolar, a US-led world order to a multipolar. And that message seems to be repeated by many large organizations, from the World Economic Forum to Russia to various world leaders. And so they seem to be working in unison. That's just something I noticed today. How did that come about from Rome? I have no idea.
Well, if you go back and study some of the biblical prophecy teachers of the 70s, there was no doubt that out of the Catholic Church would originate most of its power. Isn't that right, Mom? So from in the
You're
70s and
talking about
80s.
end times prophecies referred more to the Roman Catholic Church being the Antichrist, actually, so some of them.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying? But I
Right.
wanted to read a couple of quotes here that when I did a little study on this chapter, that I found. One of them was from the president of the European Union. And I think partly Rome has to do with these same areas of the world which Rome conquered will come back into unity or power at the end. And this is what he said. He said that borders are the worst political invention. So his point is to bring down the borders. And this is a quote that Hillary Clinton made in Brazil to the banks there. And she said, my dream is a hemispheric common market with open trade and open borders. So we're coming back with that idea that the whole world will be under one power, really, that we're beginning to accept as a possibility or a good
Okay.
thing.
That's good. That's good. I'm glad you brought those up because we're gonna build on that. Okay. By the way, what does a horn represent in prophecy?
Power.
Power. Specifically,
A king.
a king or a leader. A king or a leader. Exactly. And let's go down and read that again. Alexander, you read through what verse?
I
You
think 20. I read through 22.
Okay, go ahead and read verse 20 again.
Okay. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully.
Okay. Okay, those words spoke boastfully. Let's turn to Revelations. Everybody turn to Revelations chapter 13.
Revelation what? I'm sorry.
Revelations chapter 13.
Thank you.
So if you can read, starting Alexander, start in verse 13 and go through 4, and then we'll separate that and do 5 and 6.
Okay. So read 13 through 18.
No, you're going to read 13 through verse 4, 1 through 4, and then we're going to comment on that. Then we'll read 5 and 6.
Okay. 13:1.
Chapter
And
13.
yeah, chapter 13. Okay. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion.
All right, stop right there. Stop right there. Okay. We got 3 animals. We got a leopard, we got a bear, and we got a lion. What empires did that represent right there?
That's the
Babylon,
first.
Greece, and the Medes and Persians.
Okay. Amazingly so, right? Okay, so we're gonna find out why the 4th beast is not mentioned here. Okay, so go ahead and read the next part.
The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Men worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast and asked him, "Who is like the beast? Who can make war against him?"
Okay, so here we got the beast, all right? So the beast is controlling these 3 other animals, right? We got the same Leviathan coming back, and he's composed of Greece, Persia, Iran, and Iraq, and also Babylon. So we got Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Greece, and he controls all of that area, which is, I find this very interesting. Okay, so and then we jump down to verse 5 and 6, Alexander.
The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his authority for 42 months. Sorry about that background
Yeah, go ahead
noise.
and read 6.
He opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. He who has an ear, let him hear.
Very good. Okay, so what do we have in common with Daniel 7's horn that rises up? What's the one thing that we see that both of them do?
Arrogant, blaspheming words.
Yes, exactly. So we're talking about the same person, okay? We're talking about the same geographical area. We're talking about the fourth beast controlling this area, all right? Having the power and dominion over all of this. Now, I want to, when you look at prophecy, a lot of times, let's just say everybody here is a prophet, right? For just a day, an hour. So God comes to Matt and he goes, write this down, and he gives you a dream. And so you write it down. And so he gives you a Polaroid. And then he comes to Paul and he says, write this down. And he gives you a vision and he gives you a Polaroid. And then Mom, and then Betty, and then Joe. And all of a sudden, all these are put in the books, right? So our job is to get all the Polaroids, pull them out and line them up, okay? And see where they parallel. We are seeing two Polaroids like this. And if you turn it like this, you see John's, and you turn it like his, you see Daniel's, but it's the same image of the same person, okay? And just as the four beasts that it was talking about, we see the four beasts mentioned in Revelations a little differently, but the same way, okay? Just a different picture that you're going to see. All right, now you alluded to, Mom, when you said that these two people, one Hillary, Jezebel Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and then somebody from the World Economic Forum, speaking of this world order, this world composition of everything, right? So we believe, I think most of us believe that there's going to be these global government they're going to set up with 10 different regions. That's kind of been taught in prophecy, pretty consistent for most of a millennia. That hasn't changed much, okay? The question comes in, which is we're not given it in the book of Daniel, is how is it controlled, okay? That's the real question. How is this global government controlled? We assume that one man's going to be in charge of everything, but no one man can do everything. He has to have a philosophy, people who buy into his philosophy, and he has to have a power base. He has to have an army, and he has to have wealth. That's the one thing that you have to have in common. So just for the sake of arguing, I want you to type in, I want you to think about this. I'm not telling you this is it, but I want you to just type in G7 countries, Wikipedia. Just for sake, in your Google search, type in G7 countries and type that in, okay? And then click on it.
G7 countries.
G7 countries.
Yeah, G7.
After World War II, these 7 nations set up the current world order. But that world order was based on nation states, okay? And that nation states each kind of had their own They have own say so in their own politics and how they went about it. But the 7 nations pretty much have dictated the terms of the global agenda since World War II. There's been nations like China and Russia who try to come against it, but they never really have succeeded. Okay. And if you just read the 7 nations, who does anybody know who the 7 are?
I'm reading them.
Go ahead.
Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, United Kingdom, and the something. I didn't get that part. This is Wikipedia.
United States.
United States. Okay.
All right, so the G7 has about 770 million people. It accounts for 50% of the global wealth. 7 countries have 50% of the global wealth. And if you look at those 7 countries when it comes militarily, their militaries combined are in what type of alliance? The NATO alliance, right? And it's the most powerful alliance that's ever been since the time of the Roman Empire. Okay, so if everybody believes that we're in the end times, if we're close, right? Things don't just happen that like and just go away. There's going to be some changes, some things are going to fall, some things are going to rise, but there's generally going to be about the same way, right? Kings will be deposed of, prime ministers will come and go. But as a whole, those 7 nations pretty much set the agenda everywhere, okay? And so I'm not telling you this is the 7-headed dragon that's going to set up this global government. I'm just saying they have the biggest say-so on who would set it up, okay? All 7 countries have been geopolitical. They have reached out across the world. None of them are simply stay put in their own region. Like China stays in their own region. Russia stays in their own region for the most part, but these 7 are never been that way. They impose themselves all over the place. So it's just something I want you to consider, because as we get closer to the end of the age, I have never seen 7 nations have this much power, wealth, and an army ever. Okay?
Robert, there's something interesting in the Wikipedia here that might play into our question a minute ago. It says, these are the 7 nations, but in addition, the European Union is a non-enumerated member. In other words, they're out there, but they didn't count them among the 7.
That's right. That's
And
exactly right.
its members are the world's largest.
Yes. Yeah.
What's
Not
kind of
saying,
interesting, I think what's kind of interesting is that, I'm sorry, there's a lot of background noise, but that it comes out of the legs of iron, the Romans. And one time I think I was reading somewhere like how all the countries pretty much that you listed, we all have like Roman roots. Like
Yeah.
our government is set up from the Romans, right?
that's right.
And the ones that you listed, I never realized that until you just said about the G7. And the one person I was hearing talking was saying like the word czar, Caesar, like,
Yeah.
you know how we use that, all the things. That's so interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah, you know in Hebrew what Tsar means? Prince. Yeah, that's I found that it survived into multiple languages. Kaiser, Caesar, you know, it still survived in both Germany and Italy, both the name Tsar, well, Prince. All right, so let's go back to chapter 7. This is just something to consider. We don't know for fact this is what's going to set up this agenda, but with that much power, that much wealth, that much military, it wouldn't surprise me, right? It just wouldn't surprise me. Okay, are you guys comfortable with at least considering the idea? Yeah, that's enough.
Now, is there a reason why there's 7? Because 7 is God's number as well, right?
Interesting question, Joe.
It comes back to the idea of Leviathan being a 7-headed dragon. That's what it goes back to. When we read in Book of Revelations, coming out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, 7 heads, that's a description of Leviathan, because that's the dragon that came out. I know that sounds odd to most of us because we're not well versed in the teachings of Leviathan. But if you were able sitting at a table with the Essenes in the 1st century out in the desert, and they were breaking bread with you, Joe, they would tell you Leviathan, the 7-headed dragon. All right. So this is something that they spoke about all the time. They would talk about Assyria was a 7-headed dragon. They would get into the types and shadows. So this is not something that I'm bringing up as boop, just popped in my head yesterday. This has been talked about for a very, very long time. The Leviathan, the 7-headed dragon, would be Satan at the end of the time, would try to destroy. Okay. All right, let's go back to verse 23. Betty, you want to read?
Sure. Just that one verse or what?
23, 24, 25, 26, and 27.
Okay. Thus he said, the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom, 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the Highest One. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him.
Hallelujah. All right. All right, so let's notice something here, just something to consider. Out of this kingdom, 10 kings shall arise, and it says another shall arise after them. It seems to me that when they set up the initial government, he is not the main player. Does that make sense? He is not in the initial setting up of this or formalized government. So when they do this great reset, whatever this great reset may be, all right, and they establish these 10 regions, these kings established it, they're going to put people in charge. But initially, it says right there, and another shall rise after them, okay, which means he wasn't one of the original 10, but he takes his power, and it looks like there's 3 that oppose him getting into power. Now, I have read in some people, and I think it's been kind of pushed aside, but these 10 have been on a dispensational calendar, and there rise one, then a second, then a third, and then a fourth, fifth. I've heard some of that. I don't think that's what it's saying here. Would anybody agree or disagree with that? I don't think this is dispensational context.
No, I wouldn't think so either. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, there's going to be 3 kings who are going to oppose. They're going to oppose what he is, and but then we see that he's going to, again, before it says, I shall think to change the times and the laws. Okay, let's go to. Let me find it. Give me a second. I'll find it. And I'll give you the verse. Yeah. Give me a second, guys. Sorry about this.
While you're looking, I just want to throw out a question. If some of you guys have heard, I know some of the translation says we would change the times and seasons, and some people have alluded to time change, like moving forward and backward in time. Has anyone heard anything about that?
Mm-mm.
I mean, like the daylight savings time, the seasons or months.
Just like time travel or a reset. Some people are saying we're not really sure if we're actually in the year 2022.
Well,
But again, it's all just like everything else, we never know.
That part of flat earth.
Watch it.
They heard you.
You do know, David, he's written a book about the flat earth kingdom, and it's weird because you see that little flat earth spinning around in the among the other 9 planets or 8 planets, sorry, and everybody else is round, and then this earth comes around like this flat earth, and everybody laughs at that poor earth because it looks all different. But maybe that was by design. I don't know. I'm just kidding, Joe. All right, so let's go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
What verse?
We're going to start in verse 1, but and go through verse 7. But I just want to make something. We see from the Revelations, it's a 42 months or 3.5 years that he's going to last, but he's going to be cut short before the very end. And I want to get back to that idea that before the day of judgment, he's cut off, he's killed. Okay, but let's go here to verse 1. Now, concerning the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered together to him, we ask you, brothers, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed, either by a spirit or a spoken word or a letter seeming to be from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. Okay, let no one deceive you in any way, for the day will not come unless the rebellion comes first. Okay, this is really, really, really important. Okay, we must those who what are they called? Preterists, I believe, the ones who believe that that it came right after Nero started this whole thing, and after that, is that what that philosophy is, and that after Nero's the ushering into this kingdom? Okay, well, if Paul was talking today, he would be addressing that belief system. Okay, we haven't seen the lawless one. If we had, all global governments would be serving him. Okay. Let no one deceive you in any way, for on that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God. So there's a very important part of this thing. When we get into chapters 9, 11, and 12, we're going to deal with God's temple and how he sets himself up. But just for a second, Joe, to answer the question about times and seasons, Pope Gregory in the 6th century was an antichrist by definition, because he went and changed the times and the seasons. When you start naming planets and Roman gods by the days of the week and the months of the year after pagan gods, you are even if you call yourself a believer in the Most High and you do that, you are an antichrist. Okay, we should not have a calendar depicting any pagan Roman or Greek gods or Norse gods for that matter. Okay, so
that's the calendar we use now, right, Rob?
yeah,
So yes, let me take note of that. It was Pope Gregory, you said?
yes, Pope
That's a
Gregory,
great note to take.
by definition, Pope Gregory is an antichrist, because instead of taking the Julian calendar and putting it into a biblical order with God's feast, he put his rubber stamp on the Julian calendar, made some changes, and kept these pagan gods revered throughout the last 1,400 years.
So aren't the Hebrews
opinion,
doing the same thing with their calendar? They have pagan gods from Babylon, right, on their calendar?
yes, the only difference, Betty, because it's always been that way. It's all since the days of Solomon, we've had names of months after pagan gods. So that by itself is not the only thing. It's when you change the times and seasons, you put away the appointed times of God.
Yeah.
Okay. When you do both of those things and you revere pagan gods and you put away things of God, that makes you an antichrist, if you will. Okay.
Well,
And I was reading in the book of Enoch, just a second, Mom. I was looking in the book of Enoch, And one of the things of one of the fallen angels that was cast into a dungeon was that he refused to come to God's appointed times. All right. Now, when you read in Job chapter 1 and 2, even Satan shows up at God's appointed times. So keep that in mind. God's appointed times, if you have a preacher who teaches they've been done away with, he by nature has a spirit of an antichrist because he doesn't want to speak the truth about God's appointed times because they're not Jewish appointed times, they're at God's appointed times. So by pure definition, that's what it would be like, okay?
Amen, brother. Preach it. Also, just noticing, going back to the pagan nature of the calendar we have today, and you look at Sunday, and I just remember in Ezekiel how I think it was the priests that turned their back on the Lord and worshiped the sun.
Yes.
And
Chapter 8,
Christianity
9.
today worships on Sunday, which
Yeah.
is the day of sun worship, I think. Is that, or the sun god or something?
So, okay, so here's the thing. It's on, if there's just one thing, it looks bad. But if you find two things, then you can find something, remember, by 2 or 3 witnesses. So in chapter 8, 9 of Ezekiel, not only did they turn toward the sun and worship it, they put their back on the Most High. So there's 2 things that made them criminal in my book. Okay? So in the case of a Sunday church, if they worship on Sunday and they're turned their backs toward the Most High, those 2 things would make them wrong. Okay. So we always have to be careful in that case, because we would call fellow brothers and sisters in the kingdom. We may be slandering somebody that's got, that God is holding up. So I just am careful with.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I was there for 20 years.
Robert, back to the Gregorian calendar. That the change of feasts, which I might have misunderstood you, that happened before that actually.
Yes.
Because that was during the period, I believe, in the 400 AD, because of the prejudice that came into play under the new convert, let's say, the church leaders, and they became very anti-Jewish. But before that, probably before that, the church continued to have feast days and celebrate the feast days, correct?
True. Yeah, and there is examples. If you study a little bit of history, the church in Britain before St. Patrick worshiped on Saturday. They did not eat pork. They were Sabbath keeping, and then when St. Patrick came, they began to change, right? And so there's the influence of Rome had its influence on the way things were changed. So I'm not saying the Vatican is completely evil, but everywhere they go, they have a spirit about them that is anti-Israel, anti-God in many ways. Not completely, but a lot of times they do.
That's fascinating. I had no idea. I always thought it was Constantine that put an end to Sabbath and all the feasts. I didn't realize that the church had returned to that Sabbath worship and keeping the Lord's feasts. It seems like that cycle happened multiple times, I guess.
Yeah.
That was going on all at the same time.
Yeah, in Ethiopia, there was a major fallout in Ethiopia where you had half the church kept the Sabbath and the other half would be Sunday, and they actually fought a war against each other.
Wow.
Finally, they settled their affairs and they let those who want to they came up with an agreement so they could all get along. And that agreement has survived to this very day. But Rome has had their stamp, their influence. So getting back to the 2 Thessalonians, verse 4, who opposes and exalts him against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God. So let's stop right there. If the lawless one, if the temple is not being rebuilt, then there's no tribulation. Okay. Let me just say that again. If there is no temple, there is no tribulation. There is no 42 months. There's no 3.5 years. There's no time and time and time and a half. That doesn't exist until this takes place. Over and over and over. If you go to Joel chapter 2, verse 15, when the priests are going into a fast, they're doing it in the temple before the day of the Lord. So as we look at the end times, we must focus ourselves on the fact that there has to be an event that brings about the rebuilding of the temple.
You know,
Now-
I've read that I don't know how many times, Robert, and that just went over my head about him taking his seat in the temple and displaying himself as God.
So
How
take it
can
a
I
step,
read that and not see it?
well, or take it a step further when Yeshua says in Matthew 24, when he says, when the abomination of desolation is put, like the book of Daniel is in the temple, that would assume that a temple's in place for an abomination to go into the temple. So somehow, some way, we have dismissed this idea that a temple doesn't apply. It's not important. It's not relevant. But we can't start marking times. We can't start figuring any of this out until this temple begins to come back into place. Now, that's going to create all kinds of other issues, but we're not dealing with that today. I want to just focus on this guy here.
Okay, well, since you mentioned that, when the scripture says, let the reader understand, what exactly is Jesus implying to other than let the reader understand? Is there some hidden message there?
Where are you at? In Matthew?
Matthew. Joe, I would just say, keep it this simple. We have to worship like it's laid out in the Torah of Moses. Okay. We have to look to our Messiah, a Jewish Messiah. We have to understand the context of how he prophesies is in the context of what he was teaching them sitting on the Mount of Olives, looking at the temple below. Okay. That's the context of the conversation of Matthew 24. And so if we look at it from any other perspective, we're outside of a Jewish perspective. That's been the mistake many of us have made in the past, is we've dismissed things because it's Jewish, and we're going to be raptured up, and we're going to get out of here, and it's not going to be anything have to do with us, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if we're studying prophecy, we must have a Hebraic mindset and not a Western mindset. That's the most important thing for context. Okay. Everybody cool with that idea? Because I know there's a lot of people over the last 10, 15 years have not been cool with that idea. And they have fought us, they have ridiculed us, and we've given us a lot of grief. But
Yeah. Typically what I hear is the church will be raptured out, and all the trouble that we see in tribulation is on Israel. It's on the Jews.
yeah, I know. We'll deal with that in another area, but we have to go deal with that at some point when we deal with the book of Revelations, because he always says he comes to his people first before he goes to the nations, right? So we are his people. So he must deal with us first. He's got to cleanse us. He's got to purify his bride. I don't know. I don't see a very clean. I see a dirty bride right now. I see a sinful bride. I see a bride that's not prepared for the day of the Lord. Am I right?
That's what Peter talks about. That he says that judgment would begin with the house of the Lord.
Yeah,
starts with his,
I
and
think-
that's how Ezekiel starts off, right? The Lord started with his house, cleaning out his house first.
that's right.
And I think that's where teaching this years ago and reading and really accepting, what we were reading, I think that was the point that we felt like the Jewish nation, because they hadn't received Jesus as the Messiah, had to be brought to their knees in receiving him and purified, in other words. But we didn't realize that the church needed purification too. I think that's where I personally made my own mistake. But today there's none of us in the church on Sunday worship or even the Sabbath worshiping Christians or whatever believers that don't realize we need purification.
Yeah.
And we all stand under God's judgment. And we don't appear as the bride should appear. So I think that's where, in my own teaching and understanding, where I made my mistake, really.
Yeah.
That even though we received Messiah, we have not received his word and even the obedience that he asked us to do to be unified for one. That was the only really thing he told us to do, to
That's
love
exactly-
each other and keep his commandments. And we failed there. We're divided.
So as I want to go from 2 Thessalonians 2 and then go back to verse 27 of chapter 7. But let's tie some things in together here. And so starting in verse 5, do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things, and you know what is restraining him now, so that he may be revealed in his time. All right, can I ask a question? In this time, was Nero, was he ruling in Rome at this time?
What verse is that, please?
Verse 5. Verse 6, I'm sorry. 2 Thessalonians 2:6.
I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know that for certain.
He was. So this is the
What?
funny, this is what's really interesting about it, is because the preterist who believed that the Antichrist was revealed claimed that Nero was the Antichrist, right? Now he did a lot, he had a lot of, he was horrible. I mean, he was one of probably the most horrible human beings that ever walked the earth. But Paul said he hasn't been revealed yet, which means that the emperors of Rome during his time and shortly thereafter were not the beast of not the lawless one. They were not. It hadn't yet come. It still has to come in the future. Okay.
I just read something really interesting that might come to play here, that Satan doesn't really know the time or the hour, so he always has an Antichrist in the waiting wings to take over. And I think that comes into play with what you're saying there. Maybe that's true, I don't know, but that kind of struck me.
So this is one of the main reasons why I believe, based on what you just said, Mom, I believe the Antichrist will be from Esau, because something that's said in, I believe it's in Exodus, correct me if I'm wrong, it said, the Bible said that in every generation, you're going to have to fight Amalek. In every generation. So if in every generation we have to fight Amalek, if somebody's being prepared to set up in that position, as you said, it's going to come from the seed of Esau. I don't. So I think that fits right into with what you're saying. All right, and finally, for the mystery of the lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains it will do so until he's out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Yeshua will kill with the breath of his mouth and bring to nothing by the appearance of his coming. Okay, so that verse there, let's go back to chapter 7. And in verse 25 of chapter 7, he shall speak words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints. The word in Hebrew is kedoshim. Okay, the word kedoshim has been around since Mount Sinai. You and I, everyone here, are the kedoshim. Write that word down, ked, and it comes from the word kadosh, kedoshim.
What
Kadosh.
word is that? You said the word, but which word are you referring to? It means kedoshim.
Saints.
Saints.
Yeah.
That was one of my questions, because they use saints here rather than the word we're used to using, with the house of Israel or the redeemed or whatever.
Well, the term kedoshim means comes from the word kadosh, which is the term holy. But to be holy means you're separating yourself out from the things of the world and you're attaching yourself to the things of God. That's what kedoshim means. So that's what separates us, which means it's the remnant anyways. At the end of the day, it's the remnant will be the ones who are going to be put in the book of life, in the book of remembrance. Okay. So if you go back into that verse, it says, he shall wear out the kedoshim of the Most High and shall think to change the times and the law. Okay, we've dealt with that. Which means I think, oh, by the way, do you know there's a movement already? It's been afoot for a while. It started within the world of archaeology, but there's been a foot to eliminate a calendar that makes its beginnings in the death or in the birth of Yeshua. It's already in progress now. Okay, so that's coming soon. So not only will he remove Messiah Yeshua from the calendar, he will completely come up with his own appointed times so he can be worshiped in those appointed times. He may use existing appointed times that the Catholic Church uses or somebody else uses. I don't know, but he's going to put his own appointed times. Okay. If you go on, it says, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. What does that mean, guys? Does anybody know?
2.5 years.
3.5 years, right?
3 years.
Well, I think you're right, Joe.
2.5.
For a time, and a half a time, for 2.5 of the 3.5 years, because he's killed, but the other kings are still alive. The government's still in place. I believe he's removed before the day of the Lord. He's removed before that last year, because that's what it says, very clear. We know it's going to last 42 months, this government, right?
Mhm.
But that's pretty. Anybody else have any other translations? Because Joe's right. It says times, and a half a time.
No, it says times, plural,
Yeah, times, and
All
half a
right,
time.
well,
which I've always been told time is 1 year, times is 2 years. And then of course, half a time is half a year.
I like to see it in Hebrew. I'm curious how it's written in Hebrew. Will somebody take that as a task to figure that out?
Somebody that can read Hebrew, please. I
You
don't know
don't need that. You have apps on your phone for that.
That's right. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints, the Kedoshim, the Most High, and his kingdom shall be everlasting kingdoms, and the dominion shall serve and obey him. So I do think we're going to find out the answer to that in later on chapters, but I think he is cut short before the very end. In fact, it may be in Revelations.
Yeah, it is. It's in Revelation. I can't remember the chapter, but I would guess 12 maybe.
Yeah, you may be right. We're going to figure this out. And also, Joe, I'm going to sign this to you. Okay, you ready? I need you to learn how to Hebraically figure out the mark of the beast. And so if you have to go talk to a rabbi in there in Austin, Texas, then so be it.
I would just listen to a Christian sermon, and he said when he wanted to know the years, he went to the rabbis because they knew what he's talking about. Genesis 1, rather than going by our Christian calendar, he goes to the rabbis and find how many years we've been on Earth.
Yeah.
So we're 5,000, almost 6,000 now, right?
It's very close. Yeah. It is assumed they're off a couple hundred years because of a calculation error in the Middle Ages, but it's pretty close to 6,000. All right, so let's end in the last verse. Here's the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. So I don't know about you guys, but when I start meditating and thinking about this guy coming and rising as a government, rising power, it gives me heartburn, and and it stresses me out a little bit to a degree, because I know it's going to be a pretty tough time for us. We're his target. You know, we can't fly under the radar anymore.
Yeah, so the parallel in Revelation for the war against the saints is in Revelation 12 and 13. There
Yeah.
seems to be a split though. Yeah, because you have the woman flee to the wilderness where the Lord provides and protects her, but then the rest of her offspring, the children, they're the ones that this beast makes war against. And in chapter 13, it says he will overcome them, overwhelm them. And then in 13, it lists out the destinies of the saints, the captivity, sword, and I don't remember the third one.
Yeah, so some of you may not be familiar with this idea that so there's a teacher named Monty Judah. He's in Oklahoma. Who's never heard of Monty Judah? Okay, so Monty Judah teaches that during the Great Tribulation, that those who are part of those are his people in the congregation. We must go out into the wilderness. We must get out. We must join together like a Feast of Tabernacles, and we develop our own kingdom business within a business. So we work together. And the idea that he talks about is during the Great Tribulation, the economics that we're used to, we can't use them anymore, because the economics of buying and selling will be eventually removed from us. And so if we go out into a wilderness, we go out there, then God is going to, like he did the children of Israel, he put his presence with them and protect them. That's a teaching he has. It's something to consider about this 3.5 years. You know, I know it's if you are his kedoshim, you're going to be targeted. And it doesn't mean just because you go and camp out with 100 other people that you're going to be protected, quite frankly. It doesn't mean that at all. But the fact of the matter is he has this teaching that during the Great Tribulation, that we need to remove ourselves from the cities, because that's where the beast system is pretty much implemented. And that's actually the truth. I mean, if you look at modern day, I live in Houston, right? As most of you do, we live in Houston. It's definitely a system that it's hard to escape the system of the city. And you depend on the water, the electricity, everything is here. And if we don't play by the rules, we don't have a house anymore.
The air conditioner, the air conditioner.
I'm sweating. I played by the rules and I still lost my air conditioner. So you want to end the recording there, Joe?
Okay.
All right. So any comments or questions? We took 2 weeks to cover this, but I think it was worth it.
Can't rush through Daniel if you're going to teach it.
You certainly
And you
can.
really do need to make the correlation between Daniel and Revelation. But
Absolutely.
it's hard to keep all that in your head when you have a small brain like I do.
I
It's a
know.
lot.
Let me ask a question. I mean, this doesn't really go along with the prophecy, but Daniel was receiving this, it says, in the first year of Belshazzar. So when he came against Belshazzar and the writing on the writing on the wall, this took place before the writing on the wall, and he just kept this. They've got it out of order. It seems like that, you know.
Well, it's from what I read, it's if you go to somebody I read that it was during the chapter 4, during the time of chapter 4 Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. That's when he received this dream.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult to say, but he already knew who Belshazzar would be and how to deal with Belshazzar.
And how to deal with him.
Yeah. But it was chapter 4, or generally within the time period of Nebuchadnezzar that he was given.
Oh, hey, Alexandra, I think the host of the meeting shifted to you when Joe dropped off earlier. Can you see if you can hit stop recording on the session? I saw a pop-up come up saying the host had shifted to Alexandra.
Oh, wow, hey.
Congratulations, Alexander.
Yeah. How do I stop?
There should be a button somewhere on the Zoom screen.
Oh, here it is. Okay,
Stop.
recording.